Hi everyone, so in the last video we have completed the HTML and CSS part. So in this video we'll be going through the JavaScript part where it's more interactive. So a few things to know in the app. So when we click the Get Started button, the start page will hide, the timer will display, and it will start ticking. The question will match up to the actual question that we're on, and also the questions and the options should be the same as is in the quizzes array. So when the time is up, the timer should stop, and the time's up text should show up, and all the buttons should be disabled so you're not able to click on them, and the correct answer will be highlighted in green. The check answer button, if you realize, has disappeared, and the next question button has appeared again. So if you click on the next question, it's question 2, and the progress bar should update. And if you haven't clicked on anything, the check button will be disabled, but when you click on something, it will be enabled and you're able to check on it. If it's the wrong answer, it will be highlighted in red. If it's a correct answer, it will be highlighted in green. So if we move on to the last question, so this is the last question, and there should be a finish quiz button that shows up, and we click on that, it will show you a score. So if it's less than 50%, you'll get a better luck next time. If it's over 50%, so let's try that. You get a well done, you nailed it. All right, so let's start with the JavaScript part. So on the right-hand side here, I've got the empty script file with the quizzes array that I've put in and a few comments. So let's start off by declaring some of the variables that we'll be using and also select them from the HTML. So first up, targeting the class of Get Started. Targeting the main quiz section. Targeting the question and answer section. Selecting the final score section. Selecting the timer container itself. And also selecting the progress bar. So let's open up the HTML file in the browser, just so we can see nothing's working yet. Now let's select the buttons that we'll be using in the JavaScript. So this one, we're selecting the start button with the ID of start button. So using the query selector all, I'm selecting every single one of the option buttons that we have. Selecting the next button, the finish button, and the restart button. Now we also want a quit button. Now below this, let's declare some variables that will be changing the inner text. So the first one is my score. And then total score. And then the score text, and this refers to the text where it says well done, you nailed it, or better luck next time. And then we want the current question and also the total questions. And also we want to be able to change the timer text. Now below that, let's do some initial declaration that we'll be using later. Now this time up is an element that we've created. It's H2 heading, and that shows the time up text in red when the time is up. Now that we've declared all the variables that we'll be using, let's create some functions that can manipulate the styles. So first one is to disable the button. And it takes in an argument of button. And want to make the button disabled by adding a disable attribute to the button. And we want to set the cursor style back to default. So removing the pointer cursor style. The second function would be to enable the button. This function will be very similar to the one above. Instead of disable, it's enabling the button. And setting the cursor style to pointer. The third function is to remove the background style. So for instance, when we click on a button, we want to remove the other buttons that were selected to remove their background color. Now we have to use for each here for the option buttons because we are selecting multiple elements. So if we console log, let's just make this a bit bigger so we can see it better. So if we console log the option buttons, which is here, you see that there's 4 buttons selected. So we have to look through each one of them. So that's why I've used for each down there. I'm just going to remove the console log here. Moving down to here. Now let's make another function. That's when we clicked on one of the options. We want to set the selected button to be the button that is clicked. This selected button we have declared above, so we can reuse it. We want to ensure that all of the option buttons background style are removed. So when any of the option button is clicked, we want to change the background color. We also want to enable the check answer button. Now that we've made this function, let's go back to the HTML so we can target the button itself. Just so when we click on it, we can call the function here. Just see on click. So we'll do the same for the 4 buttons. And then passing in this particular button. Now that we've done all the styling functions, let's make some functions for the timer. So for the timer, we'll be using the set interval, just so every 1 second it can change something. It takes in 2 parameters. So the first one is a callback function, and the second one is the time that you want for the interval in milliseconds. So 1 second is 1000 milliseconds. Let's open that function up. So if the time left is more than 0 seconds, so there's still time left, we want the time left text to reduce by 1 every second. Now the reason why I'm using text content is because the timer itself, I can't really see it, so maybe I'll do it right. It's a span, so we want to know the text content. So what's the text itself? So in here you see the span, it's 15. So we want to know this text content. So that's why I've used text content here. So if there's no time left, if it's equals or less than 0, we want to disable each of the button and also display the answer. And we also want to hide the check answer button and display the next question button. Because there's a gap. Okay. After this, we want to have another if statement inside of this else if statement. So if the time is up and the person did not select any option, we want something to happen. If it is the last question, then we want the next button to hide and the finish button to display. If it's not the last question, then just display the next button. And then we also want to display the time's up text. We'll be creating this function later. And we also want to stop the timer. So now let's create the insert timer text function. When the timer count down to 0, we want the text to show 0. We want to display a time's up text. We want to insert the text before the question and answer section. So we'll be using a method called insert adjacent element, where you can choose position you want to insert in. We also want to align the text to the center and give it a red color. Now that we're done with that, let's work on the progress bar. So when we are on question 2, we want the progress bar value to be 1. And we also want to update the progress bar value accordingly. Now that we've done all that, let's work on the logical process. So when the Get Started button is clicked, and then something will happen. So I'll create the function above here. So the moment we click on the Get Started button, we want to hide the Get Started button, and we also want to display the timer. We want to disable the check answer button as nothing is selected. We want to set the total questions to be the quiz question length. So the quiz length is the length of this array here. So however many questions there are, it will display as the total questions. And we also want the main quiz content to display. We want to start the countdown for the timer. We want to set the question to be the first question in the array. So selecting the first index, which is 0. Now we want to look through each of the buttons and display the option text in the correct order. And we want to increase the current question to question 1. That's all working fine as we expected. So now let's move on to the second part where we click on an option. And then when we click on the check answer button. So I'll create the check answer function above here. So once we click the check answer button, if the current question is the last question, we want it to display the finish quiz button and hide the other buttons. So hide the next button and also the check answer button. Else, if it's not the last question, we want to hide the check answer button and display the next button. So we want to change the selected button background color to a red if that's incorrect. And after that, we'll have another function where it display answer. So if it's the correct answer, it will display green. So if the selected answer and the correct answer is the same, the green color will override the red color because we'll do the selected button background color styling first, and then we will execute the function for the correct answer below. We've yet to create the display answer function, but we'll do that after this. We want to stop the timer, so that's why we are clearing the interval. We also want to add to the score, so if we get something correct and we want to increase the score by 1. We also want to disable each of the option buttons, so you're not able to click on it. So below here, let's create a display answer function. So in here, we'll be selecting the data index that we've input into the index HTML. Say, for example, the first option has a data index of 0. We want to select the correct button index that matches the correct answer index in the quiz array. So if it's 0, we want to select the button that has an index of 0. So now if we console log, correct button should show up. And now what we want to do is we want to find the index of the correct answer button. So the correct answer for this question is the first option, which is index 0. And now we want to change the correct answer button to be a green color. Let's try that out. So the correct answer would be in green. So the reason why it's not working is because the add score function is not created yet. So it cannot execute the next line. So let's create that now. First of all, we want to find out the index of the selected button. And if the selected button is the correct answer, then we want to increase the score by 1. And we also want to find out the percentage of the score, so we want to convert that to a percentage. And if it's not the correct answer, we want to just leave it as it is. If the score percentage is less than 50, we want to display the text "better luck next time." And if the score is over 50, we want to display "well done" text. Now that this function is done, let's try it out. Yep, so all the buttons disabled now. Let's work on the next question button now. So down here, we want to add a event listener to the button. And we want to listen to a click. And once we click on the next button, we want it to go to the next question. We want to remove the background color, so any of the green or red, we want to remove all of that color. And we also want to enable all the options so someone can click on the options. Now that we've added event listener to the next button, let's create a function called next question. So we want it to display the main quiz content whenever we click the next question button. And we also want to remove the time's up text and also reset the time to 15 seconds. So after that, we also want to hide the next question button and also display the check answer button. We want to increase the current question by 1 every time we click the next question button. And we also want to disable the check answer button before the person click on any of the options. We want to update the progress bar accordingly and start the timer countdown. We want to set the question to the correct question from the quiz array to make sure that it's displaying the correct question. So if we console log this, so when we click on next, you can see that the question that comes up should be the same as is in the array. So as this is the second question, it should show how do we access object keys. So that's the same as here. We also want to change all of the option buttons to be the appropriate text according to which question it is. So now that that's done, let's check it out. Say, for example, we are on question 1, and it should display the 4 different options and also that question. When we go to the next question, it should also display the correct options and the question. Now that that's done, let's create a finish quiz button, which is showing when we're on the last question. So we want to add an event listener to it as well. We also want to listen for a click. And when we click on this button, we want the timeout text to be removed if it's present. We want to display the final score content and also hide the main quiz content. And the total score should be the same as the total available questions. And we also want to stop the timer. So now that that's done, let's check it out. Yep, that should be right. And the Y should be a capital letter, so let's change that. Now that that's done, let's work on the restart button. So it's this button here. Same thing, we're going to add an event listener to it. We're going to create this function above. So once we click on the restart quiz button, we want the score to be reset to 0, the current question to be reset to 0, and also timer to go back to 15 seconds. We also want to enable each of the option buttons and remove the background color so we can click on it again. And we also want to display the check answer button, hide the finish quiz button, and hide the finish score content. So we want to update the progress bar accordingly and start the quiz. Let's try it. Yep, so it is working fine. So let's move on to the last button, which is the quit button. We also want to add an event listener to it, but because we've selected 2 of the quiz button, one is on each of the quiz page and another one is on the final score page. And so that's why we have to look through it as well before we can add event listener on it. The moment we click on the quit button, we want the get started page to display. We also want the main quiz content to hide and the final score page to hide as well. And lastly, we want to refresh the page. Okay. Button for each is not a function. Okay, let's take a look at what we've selected. Quiz button. So we probably have to use query selector all. Yeah, so we are only selecting one button, so that's why it's not working. So now we have to change it to query selector all. So now that we're selecting multiple buttons, so 2 of them, it should work. Let's remove that console log. And when we press quit, we should go back to the starting page. And when we get to the end of the quiz app, yes, both of the quit button is working fine. So that concludes the JavaScript section. So I hope you found it useful. I'll see you next time.